Do confirm is that the chat box is enabled for you all. Are you able to access the chat window? Yeah, that's great. Okay, yeah, that's great. Great. So that's a new, that's an interesting response. So we have the option of chat. So if in case you have any queries, you can post it on the chat window so that I'll try to respond to that queries as well. But anyways, we are more oral communication. So always you're welcome to unmute yourself and raise your critical questions wherever required. Let's jump straight into the course. I guess we are running out of time already. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 people have joined. Okay, that's great. So whenever you feel my voice is low, please do let me know because I'm a little away from the mic for certain reasons to access my accessories. So if in case you have any challenge in the voice, please do let me know through the chat or you can unmute yourself and let me know. Okay, so today we are going to have a great journey in terms of learning the Spring Core effectively. Okay, so I've also prepared a slide. Probably the slide is something which I've already worked out and an introductory video is already there available on my YouTube channel. But I thought I will try to bring that slide up for you as well so that you will gain more of a visual understanding before we get into the more detailed concept. So it's going to be a kind of a refresh that we are going to have right now. So you can very well have a understanding of how we are going to progress in today's demonstration. So today, again, we are going to deal with Spring Core, and it's going to be more of annotations. You're going to learn a lot of annotations, and you're also going to see how these annotations are going to be applied technically in the application development. Okay. Okay, so let's begin. I guess you're able to see a slide right now, correct? Is the slide visible?
No, sir.
That's because I haven't shared, right? Okay.
Sorry.
Thanks for the response. Sometimes my brain goes dull. Okay, the whole screen. Okay. Now are you able to view my desktop?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so this is the slide, and here we have the IDE. I hope you are ready with the IDE. If still not, please try to quickly set up your IDE because that's a very important. It's not just about taking my tutoring. It's something which you have to practice so that then only the knowledge will bounce back. Otherwise, it's a one way of knowledge. So I advise you, please do ensure you practice a lot. That's something very important. Okay, so this is all about a Spring framework. So I have some definitions kept here. You can see that probably we can develop a Spring application using Java. And apart from that, we do have languages like Groovy and Kotlin, which we can also use to develop a Spring application. People who are not aware of it, you can also make a note of it because these are something which I usually ask in the interview. Asking the people that what other language that we can use in order to develop a Spring application. So they get stuck because they are usually practiced with developing using Java. But apart from that, you do have a language called Groovy, which is of a JVM based language, and Kotlin is also a JVM based language. I guess you are well aware of Kotlin because Kotlin is something which we are using it in the Android development. If you go to the Android development, you will get to know the usage of this language called Kotlin. Probably you can even learn Kotlin in terms of developing a Spring application and as well as the um, uh, the uh, uh, the Android-based application. Okay, okay. So let's quickly move on. Here I have something called mm, I don't know. I'm just getting a call. Just a second. I guess I've allowed. Is anyone waiting on? Okay. Hmm. Yeah. So coming to this. So looking at this diagram, this is a well-known diagram. Probably you might have seen somewhere in your researching on the Spring Framework. So this is something that we talk about when we start with Spring Framework. The main area of concern here is the Spring Core. So you can see that there is a Spring Core container is available. This is the whole runtime environment of a Spring Framework. The main focus that we have here is on beans, we have core, we have context, we have spell. Spell is the Spring expression language. On top of that, there are many other supplementary features are also there, or libraries are there, okay, which we might be using when we go for more of advanced enterprise application development like AOP, aspect oriented programming. Okay, we have something called aspect support. These are mostly of event based applications that we want to integrate in terms of reusability. There we will be using this AOP standards. So this is basically of reusability. Okay. And if you look at on the top, we have web layer, and here we will be using servlet, web. Typically, to develop a web application, it could be the usage of libraries like web MVC libraries. Okay, web MVC library. And out here is a data access integrations. Basically, Spring connects with JDBC. Okay, we have ORM, typically object relational mapping, we call it as. So object relational mapping is something we said for a JPA products like Hibernate. Okay, we have Hibernate as ORM framework, and object relational mapping, which follows the standard of JPA, Java Persistence API, correct? So apart from that, we do have a JDBC, and this we are going to see anyways. Tomorrow I'm going to start with Spring JDBC. That's going to be quite interesting because we are going to communicate with backend, the database, right? So we'll be having a lot of learning in terms of understanding this JDBC implementations along with transaction managements in Spring Core. But how do we use ORM? Before we use ORM, you need to be well knowledge on Hibernate and JPA standards. Then only we'll be able to sit on top of ORM. But this is not a part of this course. Anyways, I'll come up with a different course exclusively for Hibernate, and then we can try to think of getting integrated with the Spring application as well. Okay, so looking at all these as a base understanding, I guess the main focus now, right now, we are doing it is on the Spring Core. So what the Spring framework has internally is the container in it. The container is something very important. So the container is a part of, sorry. The container is a part of the Spring framework itself. Okay. And what do we call this container as? IOC container, correct? Great. Um, so, I mean, if you have any questions on this, probably you can hold it. We'll catch it up a bit later. I just move on with further understanding of the slides. Now, just a recall of what we did in the last week or what we tried to learn in the last week. And that's what we are going to reaffirm that we are in sync with the learning of the Spring Core so that you can follow up what's going to happen today. Now, manual dependency, last week we were talking about the manual dependencies, right? So we have the manually creating an instance. So today I'm going to take this use case of message service. You can see there's a message service. iMessage service, I can even call it as. I represents an interface. Prefixing with I always denotes that it's an interface. You know what interface in Java, correct? It's purely of abstract, but starting from Java 8, we are able to have the default method and static methods. Out of the box discussion, but still anyways, just a recall of interface. We have a iMessage interface, iMessage service interface, and down there is an abstract method. Okay, there's an abstract method called send, which literally sends a message to another system. Okay, it's not going to be more of a real time, but try to simulate that this message service interface carries one abstract method called send, and the send method carries a parameter of a string message. So whenever you invoke this method, the method will execute its business logic in order to successfully send a message to the other party or to the other end of the system, right? So that's what we are going to design the application as. So it's all about the message service. And what kind of a messaging system that we can create is, one is you can create an SMS service. Okay, SMS service is a class. SMS service is going to be a class. Message service is going to be an interface. And by now you have the answer that SMS service is going to implement the message service. Correct? So I have one interface, I have one class, and the class implements the interface. But as we keep growing with the application, we might introduce more messaging systems out also. We'll talk about that in a short duration of time, so that you will understand what other messaging system can be brought into this application development. So right now we only have this a message service and an SMS service class, and this SMS service class implements that interface. If you look at it, there is a client messaging system out there. There's a class called client messaging system, and this class is going to depend on this message service. Now the dependency comes into the picture. Okay, the client messaging system, correct? The client messaging system is going to depend on the message service. But what type of a message service instance that we are supposed to inject is nothing but your SMS service instance, correct? Because you can't create an instance for an interface, right? There is no instance for an interface. This might be more basic, but still I'm trying to recall the basic for you. Instance creation is not applicable for an interface. Okay, but that's going to be applying for the polymorphism. So this message service can carry SMS service instance, because SMS service implements the message service, correct? So that's what is happening. And interestingly, if you look at it, this is the dependency environment. This is what this class is depending on. The instance of the SMS service is what is depended by client messaging system. But this is a manual injection. Manually, we coded for creating an instance. Correct? So in that case, obviously, this is going to be of a manual injection service. And okay. Yeah. So manual dependencies are engaged, and this is what we have studied in the last week as well. So try to capture this diagram. Okay. Take this diagram registered in your mind right now. An interface, a class, and a client system. The client system is depending on one of the service called SMS service, which is of type message service. That's all. Now coming to the more detailed way of understanding the creation of the instance, we can go for something called factory pattern. Okay, we have something called factory pattern here, right? The factory pattern, what it does is, as in the last week, I was giving a, I was using this terminology called factory pattern, but let's see how the code would look like. Okay, now again, we have a message service, and this is an interface. We have a SMS service, and it is a class. Great, it implements the message service, the same scenario. But I'm going to introduce email service on top of this. So email service is also a class which implements the message service. And we have a Twitter service, and Twitter service is also a class which implements the same message service. You're getting it? Now, it's not just about the SMS service we have right now. We do have email service. We do have Twitter service. All three service classes are implementing the same message service interface. So I'm slowly blowing up the understanding. From a single service class, we are growing to a two more additional service classes like email service and Twitter service. Now what happens here is, The client messaging system is again depending on the message service. But what type of a message service do you want to inject? Is that an SMS service or a Twitter service or an email service? It's of three different versions of message service types are there. So ideally here it's a question that pops up: what type of a dependency to be injected? Whose instance we need to inject here? Is that an SMS service or email service? Let's say, for example, it's going to be an SMS service. What happens if the client says, hey, please try to use email service for one of the functionality? You have to come back to the code and make the modification out there, correct? So, and later on, as Twitter comes in, Twitter service instance need to be injected rather than having an email service, because they want an instant tweet to be done into their business process. So you want to change the email service to Twitter service. So it keeps changing, right? If it's hard coded, we need to manually go and change those references. References, what I mean is instance. Okay. A message service references are going to be email service or SMS service or Twitter service. So obviously, let me consider that it's going to be an email service first time, or it's going to be an SMS service, or it's going to be a Twitter service. Doesn't matter. Any one of the service, which is which you need to inject inside this. So let's assume it's going to be an SMS service, but still it looks like a manual dependency. Manual injection of service is what is followed here. Okay, hope this diagram looks clear. But how we are going to enforce this factory pattern is, I'm not going to inject directly into the code. Okay, sometimes in the in the interview you might be asked with factory pattern based questions also. At least you try to have some basic understanding of what factory pattern is, so that you can respond to such kind of a question. Now looking at it, I'm not going to inject this instance. I'm not going to inject this instance manually. I'm not going to do it. But how am I going to do it? I'm going to do it via factory pattern. But to design a factory pattern, I, as a programmer, have to develop a code to create a factory pattern snippet, so that the factory pattern code can be used to inject the service. Getting it? So that's what. Just mute. Yeah. So yeah. So looking at it, I'm not going to inject. What happened before? We manually injected, but now I'm not going to manually inject. If you're not going to manually inject, and if you're going to use this code, sure, we will end up with a null pointer exception, and that's what we
Sir, you
experienced
are inaudible.
last week.
Hello.
Hello? Hello? Is there any challenge?
Sir, you are inaudible.
No, we can hear.
My voice was not audible. Huh?
No, I can audible.
Yeah, I can hear.
Okay. Anyone else facing any challenge?
Yes, sir. You're fine from now.
Hello. Karthik, do you have any question? Okay. Yeah. Yeah, so I'll just stop here. Before I go to the next slide, probably let me take some queries. If you have any questions, please ask me. I don't want to rush it out, but literally, if you have any questions, please post it. Is there anyone? Do anyone have any questions on the slide that you're viewing right now? Hope this makes clear, right? So before it was without factory pattern, we manually injected the instance, and now I'm restraining myself from not injecting the instance anymore manually in the code level, but someone else is going to do, and that someone else is what I'm trying to highlight here as a factory pattern code, and that code will be called upon getting the instance, but still there is a manual work is involved. Okay, and that's why we go for the next level of design pattern called IOC pattern. Okay, inversion of control or design dependency injection patterns. So any questions, please do ask me. Even if it's going to be a basic question, it's fine. I'm okay with it. please do let me know. What is the difference of Spring and factory pattern?
Sir, for handling the dependency injection and instances and for the futures, we are using for Spring. But inside the Spring, again, this concept is looking like, this factory pattern concept is looking like Spring. Again, suppose they are asking what is factory pattern individually means, what I can answer, sir.
A factory pattern, see, factory pattern is a pattern of code which we create manually. But if you look at the Spring base or Spring style of injection, it's different. Spring style of injection has a different pattern called IOC pattern, which they have designed, and it is a heart of the Spring framework actually. IOC pattern is the heart of the Spring framework. Factory pattern is there for ages. We follow this factory pattern even before Spring existed. You're getting it?
We will take this as customized for ourselves.
Of course, yes.
Yes.
Those days we were only using factory pattern. Okay. But Spring is following the pattern of like factory pattern, but it is not exactly the factory pattern. It has a different other standards called IOC, inversion of control. The container is a different set of logic actually, but we are overcoming this factory pattern with the help of Spring framework. So that's what the understanding is. Is that clear?
Sir, now it's clear.
Hello.
Yes, sir, now it's clear.
Yeah, fine. So yeah, now if you look at the code, you will understand. So when I go to the next slide, you will understand actually. I guess Karthik is facing some problem. Karthik, are you able to hear me? Because I guess others are all able to hear me, correct? If anyone has any challenge, please do let me know. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Now, if you look at, so the understanding is I don't want to inject anything out here. Okay, but I will depend on the factory pattern, and the factory pattern will be used to get injected on the, at the runtime. At the runtime, the injection will happen. But we need to write a code here. Okay, we need to write a code here in order to connect with this factory pattern. Okay, and the factory pattern will cook up the instance. Will cook up the instance. Okay, and that instance will be written back in the place where you're calling the code, calling the factory pattern. The code that we are going to place here will actually invoke the instance. Okay. So it's still it's like tightly coupled. Before it was like tightly coupled, right? When we go for manual injection, it's going to be like tightly coupled. But right now I want to make it as a loosely coupled environment, and that's the reason we go for the factory pattern design. Now what happens here is that is a client messaging system, and the dependency is out here. You can see that, but the instance is not given yet. There is no instance. Please make a note of it. There's no instance. You still have a method called send message. Okay. But you need to call this message service in order to call the method called send and forward the message. Forward the message, correct? So this class is now depending on this message service, but there is no instance available. No manual instance is available. There is a meaning. I don't have any manual instance. So how do we bring that instance at the runtime? Is by using the factory pattern. Look at the class of the factory pattern closely. What are the rules for factory pattern? You just create factory pattern can be made more complex. Okay, but I'm just throwing a light on the basic level or on the high level. If you look at the message factory class, the class has a message service variable, a reference variable, which is marked as static. It's a static variable. Please be make a note of it. It's a static variable of type message service. This is an interface, correct? Please always remember that it is still an interface. So we need to inject the class reference of type in message service. So I have a method called factory method. There is a method called factory method. Okay, and this method actually returns the message service. I'm not saying SMS service return. I'm not saying what else? Twitter service. You can return either one because the return type is generic type. Okay, the return type is a generic return type. So what happens basically here is you can return either SMS service or Twitter service or a mail service. It doesn't matter. But the return type is more of a generic type. The method is also static. The method is also static. So closely, if you watch, everything stands as a static terms. And inside this, I'm using this message service variable. Okay, the message service variable is used. And here we need to manually code the creation of the instance. The new keyword is used, but whose instance will come in here? That's a question that you can decide based on the client's information. You can either go for SMS service or you can go for mail service. It depends on. Then finally, you got to return a message service once after the instantiation is done, right? So this is what this particular piece of snippet of code is trying to explain. I guess it's more self-explanatory. If you have any questions on this, please do let me know. Is there any question?
Message factory class is a predefined class, sir.
No. It's
We
not
have to create manually.
Yeah, it's see, nothing is predefined here. See, I'm still now not talking about Spring. Okay, it is without Spring. So message factory is my own class. I customized, I created manually. Okay. It can be summary factory also, doesn't matter. You're getting it? Anything.
Yeah.
Here nothing. I'm not using any predefined libraries or something like that, right?
Okay.
So I cooked up this class. Why? Because in those days, as a developer, we write the factory classes like this. N number of factory classes we have to create in order to manage the instances effectively. Okay. Yeah. Any other question? Do anyone have any other question? Okay. Now the question is what's going to happen next? So let's look at the climax that we are waiting for. So this is what is the factory pattern is. Okay, factory design pattern or whatever we can call it as. Please make a note of it. So what happens here is message factory dot factory method. I'm using the class name to call the method name. Why? Because the method is marked as static. So you can use the class name in order to invoke the method. And when you invoke the method, it will return an instance. So what instance it's going to return? That's the question. We haven't manually written any instance out there. But let's assume that it's going to be a Twitter service. Okay, it's going to be a Twitter service. And that Twitter service instance is what is going to be returned on the call of this method so that this message service variable is going to be filled up with whose instance? Finally, the message service is going to be filled up with whose instance? Twitter's instance. Correct? What happens if the client comes and says that, hey, please change it to SMS service? You will not touch your code. The main system of application, or you have some 200 classes. Those 200 classes, you don't need to touch them. You just come to the factory pattern class and change manually, remove this Twitter service and embed SMS service. But there might be a situation where you want to use all, but that's a different design story. Okay, you can have multiple factory patterns. One returns Twitter service, one return SMS service. That's a different story. You can make it complex, as much as complexity that you want to involve with, you can. But the overall understanding is the injection is a question. What type of an injection is going to happen? Is that a manual injection, or is that a external injection like factory pattern, or it is going to be a dependency injection pattern that we are going to follow? The first thing that we saw was manual. Now what you're doing is it seems to be manual. Yes, of course it seems to be manual, but to a certain extent the coupling is reduced. It's not tightly coupled. Even if you make any change here in the class of the Twitter service, you need not impact this class. Only the factory class will get impacted. Correct? So you need to come up here and make a change. But this class is nowhere disturbed, or this class is nowhere impacted And so we call this pattern, we call this factory pattern embracing the topic of loosely coupled environment. With the help of factory pattern, you can engage with loosely coupled environment instead of tightly coupled. In the last week, we discussed more in detail about the tightly coupled and loosely coupled environment, correct? So that's what I'm trying to frame out here. So hope this makes sense. If you still have any questions, please do let me know. Any questions? Okay, great. If there is no question, I guess let's reiterate this once again. We have a factory pattern class. There is a system which is awaiting for an instance to be offered by the factory pattern class. So that system is invoking the factory pattern class method, a static method, and the static method is ideally returning a static reference which carries the instance, and that instance is manually injected there in the factory class, and that instance is getting returned to the respective dependency. Okay, so that's what is happening. Okay, now let's move forward. In Spring, okay, it could be 5.x or whatever. This I've created a bit earlier last year. So we are actually dealing with Spring 5. Okay, the version that we are learning is Spring 5. Now, if you look at here, the same message service interface, send method, SMS service, and the scenario looks more similar. Okay. Now, the question is, when we introduce Spring Core in the same use case, how it's going to help us? Because we already saw how the factory pattern would look like. Now, if you go here, this dependency, okay, this dependency is a challenge for us here where we are facing a problem because it looks like a manual dependency. We eliminated this with the help of a factory pattern, correct? But right now, what we are going to do is we are going to bring in an IOC, inversion of control, dependency injection mechanism, so that we don't need to manually create any factory classes or so. It will be automatically taken care by the IOC container. More similar to what we did in the factory pattern is what is going to be followed in IOC also. But the difference is IOC is much more complex when compared to the factory pattern that we create. Okay, it has many advantages over using a manual factory pattern. So looking at this dependency, how it looks like is the client messaging system inside a JRE, Java Runtime Environment. The client messaging system is manually depending on SMS service. Can you look at it? The diagram flow says we are manually depending on SMS service because we wrote the instance explicitly. So this is tightly coupled environment. Any change occurs, your client messaging system will also get impacted. To overcome this problem, I'm going to introduce the same message service system, but in a different aspect. How? The drawback we saw, the tight coupling drawback, I guess we have seen. The problem is it will impact the class, how many ever class you have. Those classes who are depending on this particular service, if there's a change on the service constructor or anything as a change you make, will impact all the hundreds and 200s of classes in turn when it is tightly coupled. So to ensure we move out of the tightly coupled environment, we move with a factory pattern, but that's a little a critical process because we have to manually maintain the factory classes. So for 300 classes, you might be having some 70, 80 factory classes to be created, and that seems to be a little complex environment. So now coming to this similar use case, let's try to remove this instance and let's try to inject it from the external entity. But this time it's not going to be a factory pattern. Please make a note of it. This time it's not going to be a factory class, but instead I'm going to use the Spring IOC container to do the injection service. Okay, so it could be either email service or Twitter service. Without the factory pattern, we are going to see that. I'm not sure why it is repeating. So, okay, this is something which we keep changing it. Okay, starting from the SMS service to email service to to the mail service, that we can keep changing it. But ideally, removing the factory pattern. Okay, I'm trying to remove the factory pattern and I'm going to replace it with IOC container. Please see the diagram. The diagram, what it says is, in place of a factory pattern, I'm going to bring in the IOC container. We don't need to manually write any of that factory pattern code. That will be taken care by the IOC container. And the IOC container is actually managing all the instances. If you closely look at it, we have this instance management happens out here. Okay, Twitter service instance. These are objects. Please understand that these are objects. Okay, all these objects are managed and maintained in the object pooling, and the IOC container is creating all these objects and keeping it in the object pool. Whenever you ask for it, it will pick the object and hand it over. Okay, so there are two ways of injections that we can happen. One is the constructor based injection. I guess we already discussed in the last class, constructor based injection. Another one is setter based injection. Correct? So you can use either one of the pattern to get injected by that particular object, and it seems to be more clear. So which instance do you want? Which type of instance do you want? That you have to decide based on the call. Okay, based on the instance that you want to offer, based on the name, you can just choose which one you want. If it's a Twitter or SMS or email, you can just have some naming convention for it and you can forward it to the specific place. So instead of factory class, now this will be automatically looked up from the IOC container, and the IOC container will return the object in place. So that is what is actually happening here. Okay, so make a note of it. This diagram is something very important, right? So when you have this understanding of IOC container, please try to remember this diagram so that you can understand the concept and you can recall the concept. We'll go more in detail about this code shortly. Before that, I'll just show you one more way of understanding this flow. So this is dependency injection IOC pattern, we can call it as. Okay, dependency injection pattern and IOC pattern. Okay, now the injection happens either a constructor based injection or it could be a setter based injection. You're getting it? A constructor based injection or setter based injection. This can still be avoided. Constructor based injection, setter based injection can be avoided by going through a mechanism called auto wiring. We'll talk about this. Is called as wiring, constructor based wiring, setter based wiring. But we can also perform an auto wiring concept. That's which we are going to discuss today in detail. So the final slide understanding is, if you look at it, we have the JRE environment, and here it is a Spring IOC container. In the earlier slide, there were no presence of IOC container. Now you have a IOC container. Okay, so having this IOC container, what happens is we have this. So we have this IOC container in place, and if you look at it, this IOC container needs some information to be forwarded. Okay, you need some information to be forwarded to this IOC container. So then the IOC container will do its job perfectly, like cooking up the object, wiring the object, maintaining the object on the pool, taking care of the life cycle of the object. A lot of initiatives that this IOC container can do only when you are giving the right information to the IOC container. So how we can give that information? How are we going to give that information? That's the question that we have. So you need to provide a configuration code. Okay, the configuration code have to be handed over to this container. You're going to get, and the container will do its job accordingly by reading all the informations taken from the configuration code, and it will start creating the object, and each object will be wired internally. Okay, so you can have multiple objects, and those objects will have its wiring, means depending. That wiring can be done automatically by the container, but the container can do the wiring only when you provide that information in the configuration file. Okay, so what type of a configuration file will that be? Okay, so that we have to understand here. So there are three versions of configurations. Okay, so one is XML based configuration. That's what we saw in the last class, right? XML based configuration. Now we have annotation. Okay, we can combine with annotation, XML plus annotation. The combination is XML plus annotation, or if you want to remove the XML, I don't want the XML, then replace it with Java based configuration. In the last week, I gave you some slight information on that as well. So either you can follow XML or you can follow Java. But to make your life little bit easier, they started to introduce annotations as well. So XML plus annotations combined, you can provide the configurations to your IOC container, or you can combine annotations with Java code, Java configuration with annotation. So the combination can be either one. Can I mix all three? Can I have XML, annotations, and Java because I have a little older application? Okay, so I want to reuse that application, but those application codes are actually configured via XML. Can I carry that XML and try to modernize the future code using Java configurations and annotation? Yes, of course you can do it. We still have the provision for extending your XML configuration and add it on with the Java configuration and stitch everything together along with annotation so that your life becomes so simple. The developers or the programmers' life becomes so simple. Okay, so that's what the understanding here is all about. So now either of the configuration that you provided to the container will take the configuration code and it consumes the information into it. Once the IOC container consumes the information at the runtime, based on the configuration details, it will start reacting. So what it actually does once the configuration is handed over is what we are going to see in this flow. So the client messaging is actually not going to manually get the message service instance. Rather, the IOC container is going to inject the instance into the client messaging system. So it could be a SMS, Twitter service, or email. Okay, those instances are already available on the container pool. It will take, the IOC container will take that and inject it to this client messaging system. But how the injection can happen? Through constructor based injection or setter based injection. Okay, that method you need to follow. But when we go for auto wiring, we can still try to eliminate the constructor based injection and setter based injection also, that we will see in the live code. So injecting happens. Before, what happened was, if you can recall the previous slide which I have shown, client messaging system was voluntarily going and accessing the message service because it's a manual injection at that time, correct? The programmer manually injected it. But this time it's going to be handed over by the IOC container. So the client messaging system will get any one of the instance in a injecting mechanism or an injecting methodology, so that the client messaging system instance will be finally handed over to the end user, and the respective client code will get executed. The client message code will get executed in order to initiate your message sending message communication, SMS communication or Twitter's communication or whatever it is. So the flow is very clear here. You all start from the IOC container. The IOC container needs a configuration code, and the configuration code could be either a XML or a Java configuration combined with annotation, or you can have all the three in place also, and hand it over to the container. The container will start reading all the configurations at the runtime. When the application is launched for the very first time, the container is triggered, and the container is going to do all the reading of the configuration code, and it will start cooking up all the object, wiring the object, do all the settings, whatever is required, and your system is all up and running. Your application is all up and running. Now looking at this IOC container, what we mean here is, from the code point of view, it's application context. Please do recall, we had an application context design, right? So that application context is the actual real-time runtime representation of the IOC container. In the code, we are visualizing the IOC container as an application context. And that's it all about the slides. So we will go back to the code. But before I end this slide, please let me know if you have any question. So I'm trying to do as much as possible to make you people to understand. So anyways, I'll be sharing these slides as a PDF format. So if you want to just recall, or you sit through an interview, just go through these slides visually and try to understand. Any questions, please do let me know. Your questions are welcome, because only then it shows that you're understanding. So I took almost 15 minutes of time, I guess. I knew that it'll happen because when we touch the slide, obviously the time will be consumed more because we try to discuss more points out there. But I felt that it's something essential for you people because I could see there are new learners are there. So obviously they need a time to understand that basic fundamentals. So that's why I took some time. So what are the three things that we saw today? Manual injection, factory pattern based injection, and IOC based Spring IOC based injection, dependency injection, inversion of control. Correct? Any questions? Anyone? Any simple question? Still, it's advisable. Please do ask questions. If you are not able to follow up, please let me know which part you are unable to follow up, so that I can reassure that I could able to explain at my best, so that you can understand things clear. So for sure, there is no question. Okay. Not sure why so silent. Anyways, let's get into the code. So from now on, it's going to be more of a coding that we are going to see. So let's assume the same messaging system. Is my voice audible, or is that I'm speaking alone?
Yeah, audible. Audible.
Thank you.
Sir, audible.
Yeah, I got it. Thanks. Because of I thought there's no response, so sometimes there are chances that my network might go down, but I'm trying to keep at the best of my network in place so that it won't disturb. Okay, so right now we are on top of this IDE. I'm going to create a new project again. Okay, sorry that I'm creating the project once again. It's good that we again recall how we create a project. So it's going to be a Maven this time. Maven project. Hit next. Hit next. You can notice that still I'm using 1.1. That doesn't matter because the recent version that we have for the archetype is 1.4. That doesn't make any much of a big difference. Let's see if I'm able to create this. Com dot messaging system Shaktivel Sendil Kumar. Okay. Mena, who's that? Anyone knows?
Sir, I think Aruna Devi.
Okay. Okay. So here we have the the artifact that we are going to use here is let's call this as messaging application, and the group IDs are there, so I don't want to have this package name as messaging application. Messaging. Okay. Hope this creates the project. Okay, now the project is successfully created. It's a Maven project, messaging application. So now quickly we go into the pym.xml and try to add the dependencies. Spring-context. So the very first dependency that we need to add, as I said already, if it's a Maven based, we are supposed to use Spring-context. Since I don't have the local repository in place, it's all the way going to the global repository and trying to search. So it might take, yeah, see, it's taking some time. It took some time to list out all the Spring context based libraries. So ideally, we have to search for the one that we are going to use. Yeah, so here it is. So Spring context. Am I using the latest version? Why the version says 1.0.2 Spring framework here? Yeah, still it is 1.2.6. Okay. Okay, let me see what's going to happen. This is not the one we have to use actually. Okay. So let me remove this. We go to this previous project and we'll try to use the manual XML code. I guess we have already added the dependency, the inventory service. Okay. So, okay. Let me do one thing. Let me go and get the version. So sometimes what exactly happens is we will be having the option of not reaching the global repository correctly. So let me take the Spring-context Maven repository again, and we'll try to get the newer version, 5.3.7. Let's copy this. But technically speaking, if we have the local repository downloaded, we will not have this challenge. Okay, so since there is a problem in my local repository, I'm still having this challenge here. Okay, so this is what it should happen actually. Spring-context 5.3.7. So if you go to the dependency hierarchy, you can see all the transitive dependencies are in place, as like we saw in the last week. We have Spring Core, Expression, Beans, and AOP. These are the four essential libraries that are required in place in order to start with Spring Core application. Now, looking at this application, we are going to create more classes and flows. Okay, so the very first thing that we are going to do here is I'm going to create an class called I'm sorry, an interface. The very first thing is I'm going to create an interface named as iMessage service, and this is what which I was trying to explain through a slide. iMessage service, I referencing to the interface, and we'll create that interface here. Okay, I'm sorry. I have to create it in a package. So com.messaging system service dot let's say service, and we can drop it here. Okay, so we have this iMessage service inside a service class. Okay, and I'm going to have another package called client and here we are going to create that class name called client messaging system. Okay, client messaging system, and it's a class. Okay, so let's refresh. Now we have to create multiple services, but right now I'm just going to create one service class called SMS Service. That's another class that we are going to have it here. Going to the iMessage service as an interface. Here we are going to create an abstract method which is going to carry a parameter called string message. So literally what's going to happen here is we are going to send a message. So we are going to call the send method to send a message. Okay, and that's what the idea is all about. Now going to the SMS service, what we have to do here is implement that interface. Implements the iMessage service interface. And now we get an error stating that there is an abstract method interface which need to be overridden, right? So we're going to override the send method, which is a mandatory step when we go via interface. So this is our real-time application will all follow the standards as. So don't just practice with some ABC class or some demo class, demo one class. Please try to follow the standards. That's something very much important. Only then you will be having more confident to converse with the people with more technical insights. Okay, so please follow the standards. Very much important. Naming conventions are very important. The patterns are very important. Okay, so I'm going through interface right now here. It's because to make you people understand that this is our real time system of applications will all be coded. So interface way is always a better approach. So now here you can just sys out and say as SMS message, and you can print the message that's been passed over to this method. Okay, that's all. So now we have a client messaging system, and the client messaging system is going to look out for the SMS service. So go to the client messaging system, and the client messaging system, we are going to create, let's say, private SMS. Instead of going for SMS service, let's go for iMessage service. Following I before the message service is always not required because there are few standards where you can just call it as a message service interface. But for my understanding or for my representation, the prefixing of I denotes that it's an interface. So I message service equals, we need an instance. Whose instance? The SMS service instance. So I'm going to manually inject that new SMS service. Okay, now we can have another method here, public void client message processing. This is just a client side of method, and here again you need the message string message, and internally you can use that service send method. See, actually that send method will have some certain logic actually, but I didn't provide that because we are not writing that logic explicitly, right? So it might have some connect with the real-time messaging system tools. So they might be following some queue pattern to send the message. So a lot of codes might be involved. Many libraries might be connected up with those things. I'm not coding it right now. So iMessage service, you can call the send method and forward the message that this method is receiving. Okay, so the flow goes like this. We have this. Okay. This is, So what exactly happens here is we have this iMessage service, which gets an instance of SMS service, and the reference variable is used to call the method of a send method, which is defined in this SMS service. Now this looks like a manual dependency. Okay, so now it's time for us to quickly execute this flow. Now finally going to the app. It seems to be the same code that we wrote last week, but anyways, it's better to recall it again. So now here we are supposed to use the client messaging system. Client messaging system. Client messaging system equals new. So everything is hard coded. Everywhere we are manually injecting it. Okay. We are not depending on any factory patterns or any IOC patterns as of now. So, client messaging system dot send. I'm sorry. Client messaging system or client message processing method, and there you can say, hi, Sean. Let's catch up this weekend. Okay. So this is what we have. What's an issue? Okay, I didn't save all. Okay. So this is the method that we have, and here we are forwarding the message, and the message will go to the client messaging system. The messaging system, client messaging system will forward the message to the processor, the message processor. The message processor type is SMS, so it goes straight to the SMS service, and then the SMS service will have some hundreds of logic of code to be executed in order to properly send the message to my friend called John, and he receives the message. So that's what the simulation is all about. Okay. Now let's quickly go to the main method and run this piece of code. Great. So what exactly happened? My friend would have received this message and things are fine. Everything is fine. So the system works intact. There's no problem as of now. Correct. So now I'm going to upgrade this via the external injection service. I'm not going to reiterate on the factory pattern. You can try it out through slides. I've explained it. It's just adding a factory class and then injecting it. That's all. But I'm going to take you to the IOC based workaround. So what is required? You can just sing along with me. The first thing is we need application context. Correct? Application context. Application context equals new. This time I'm not going to use class path XML application context. Last week we had a thorough understanding of class path XML application context. We forward the configuration class, right? So what is the configuration class? Okay, where is that?
Annotation context, application context.
Yes. So this time, so technically speaking, if you look at this one, instead of XML file, I'm going to hand over the Java based configuration. Okay, so that's what is going to happen. Now, new annotation config application context, right? Pretty good. Now, I'm going to teach you different ways of loading the configuration code. Okay, so before we go into that, let me first create a configuration class. So where do we create that? Let's keep it in the base root directory itself. That will be the apt place to place the configuration class, and the class name is going to be messaging system config. Okay, you can call the class name like this, messaging system config. Messaging system config. Now this class is the configuration class, like the Java configuration class. Okay. Now to ensure that this is a configuration class, we are supposed to use at configuration annotation. In the last class we saw that. So we are going to use at configuration. So what this at configuration does practically is, this is trying to mark, okay, this annotation is trying to mark this class as a configuration class. For whom? For the IOC container. So the IOC container is eligible, okay, the IOC container is eligible to refer this class for reading all the configuration details, the details which I'm going to embed right now. Okay, look at the at configuration annotation. This annotation comes from where? This annotation comes from org.springframework.context.annotation. Okay, you have to just recall these packages. So one thing that you can notice is always the Spring Framework base package is org.springframework. You know that we are right now reaching out to the library of context, and there you have annotation, and inside that there is an annotation called configuration, which is imported, and we are using that at configuration. This is a flag. At configuration is like a flag which will help the class to be marked as a configuration class. Is that clear? This is a base. Hope this makes clear. Is this class eligible for handing over to the IOC container? Will this class be eligible for configuration part for the IOC container? Yes, of course. So now going back to the client messaging system, I'm sorry, to the application startup class, you have the annotation config application context. So what we need to place here is the messaging system config dot class. So this is how you're supposed to place your configuration class to the IOC container. This is the way we refer. You're getting it? Is that clear? So this is one way. Okay, this is one way to pass on. One way to pass on the configuration class. So what will happen now is I'm not going to use this client messaging system, okay, in order to get the reference. The very first thing that I'm going to do is going to the messaging system configuration. The first configuration code that I'm going to use is starting with @bean annotation. Okay, you have an @bean annotation which is equivalent to the XML bean tag, where there we used ID equals the ID, the name for the class, and then you use a class attribute to define it, correct? So this is what is equivalent to this @bean single annotation. You create a method called public. The return is going to be client messaging system. Okay, client messaging system get, it can be get or anything, it doesn't matter. So let's say client messaging system. Okay, you can call it this way. So the method name is client messaging system, and it has to return the client messaging system object. So I'm going to create client messaging system equals new client messaging system. right? Hope it's readable to you all. Now what you have to do, return this object, that's all. Now you can compare this. It seems to be more of a factory class. We again create an instance and then we return. Yes, of course, it looks more similar to that, but factory patterns are more complex. Okay, as the application grows, it's more complex because we need to maintain the life cycle of the object as well. But here, that's not the case. It's been handed over internally by the Ioc container itself. Okay, so this is a configuration code. What you're seeing right now here from the line number 12 to line number 16 is the configuration code. Configuration code given to Ioc container in order to create the instance and keep it in the object pool. Now you need to recall the diagram. Okay. So you got to recall this diagram. This one. Right? So the Ioc container needs that configuration details in order to create the object and keep it in the pool. And that's what which I'm trying to do right now. Okay. How many object will it create? How many object will it create? When this configuration code is handed over to the Ioc container, the container will by default have the settings of this adbean to be considered as singleton. So it's a singleton bean. Singleton means only one object will be created by the container. Okay, will be created by the container and the object will be kept in the pool. Okay, it's not going to create multiple objects. Single object is going to be shared. It's a shareable object. Okay, all components can make use of the same object. It's a single object. So default is singleton bean. Default is singleton bean. Correct? Default is singleton bean. Whereas if you look at the second option is prototype. Prototype bean is not default. We need to explicitly mention if you want the object creation type should be of prototype. Okay, it has to be mentioned explicitly. The next one you have request. The next one you have session, but these both are applicable for web applications. So literally that will be coming in web MVC layers. Session is also a session bean, a bean of type session is like in the web. Throughout the session, your object is accessible. If it's a request, it is only accessible within the a single request. After that, the request is lost. Your objects are lost. But if it is a session, it will be kept in the session memory as long as the session is active. So such kind of a discussion is what happens in the request and session. So what are the four major types of bean creations can happen is singleton bean, prototype bean, request, and session. And these are called as, all these four are called as scopes. Okay, singleton scope, spring bean scopes, singleton scope, prototype scope, request scope, and session scope. So right now this is going to be placed under which scope? This client messaging system object will be available in which scope? Default to singleton scope. Okay, if you want, you have to apply explicitly by using an annotation called add scope. So if it's an add scope and if you are using you can see there are multiple types. You do have application scope. Application scope is throughout the application, and that's again used in web application scenarios. So it's equivalent to the application level context. Okay, so we call it as a servlet context there, right? Similarly, servlet context is a representation of the whole application. If you want to place the object on that level, then it's an application scope. Session and global session are all interconnected. Prototype we have, request we have, and singleton we have. Singleton is default. You can see that they have marked the singleton scope as default scope. Correct. We do have WebSocket. WebSocket is used for a different purpose. The scope is different. These are newly introduced. But the major scope that you will be dealing with is singleton, prototype, request, and session. And more frequently that you will be using is singleton and prototype. Because when it comes to request and session, we deliberately have a request handling and session handling mechanisms explicitly in the web application that is coming from servlet. You have a HTTP servlet request, you have HTTP session. Okay, so those are already available, but still, if you want to use this Spring provided request and session scopes, you can still carry that in your MVC creation, application creation. But in the core level, you'll be using prototype. Prototype means single bean alone will be created. I'm sorry, singleton means it's a single bean alone will be created. If it's a prototype, okay, if it's a prototype, you will be created with multiple beans. Whenever a request comes in, for every request, one bean will be created. You're getting it? Every request you make, one bean will be, bean means I'm talking about the object. Bean object will be created. That's what prototype is. But singleton, 1000 request, one object. Prototype, 1000 request, 1000 object. You're getting it? So that's the main difference between a singleton bean and a prototype bean. And these are called as Spring Bean scopes. And how we can configure the Spring Bean scope is by using the add scope. Add scope, and you can define it as a prototype, or you can give it as a singleton. Do I need to give singleton here? If I give or if I don't give, if the code is there or not, by default it's singleton. So irrespective of whether you use add scope explicitly or not, it's going to be singleton. Then why we need to have an add scope explicitly? In which scenario we need to have? When you want to change the default settings of singleton to a prototype, then you are in need of an add scope. Does it make sense? So if you have any questions on this, please do let me know before we go and understand the usage of this snippet of code. Any question?
Here that admin only act as a factory pattern area.
Come again?
At bean area, this is the configuration file.
Okay, that's 1 second. Is there any reason behind default scope as singleton? Okay, I'll come back to that. Yeah, tell me, someone. Yeah, Joshua, right? Who's that? Who was asking a question now?
Bean annotation in this place.
Yeah, admin annotation.
Now this client messaging system only acted as that configuration file, right?
Client messaging system is not your configuration file. Messaging system config is your configuration file.
Okay.
How come this will be a configuration file? This is a part of our application system, right? We are trying to configure the client messaging system object through this configuration part. This is what is your, this is equivalent. So this class is actually equivalent to the XML file that we created last class. You remember that I created one XML file, application.xml.
Yes.
That file is replaced by this Java based configuration. As per the diagram, you can just recall that it's a Java based configuration. So this is how you will create a Java based configuration. The name itself is given here, cut configuration, representing that this class is a configuration class. You will write all your configuration inside this class, equivalent to whatever you created as an XML template there, a tag will all be converted like this.
So this admin is the XML file is having one bean tag.
Correct. That's what I've marked here, right? You can see
Okay.
this.
Okay, sir.
I've already told you that there is a bean tag in the XML file. That is what is equivalent to this bean annotation.
Okay, sir. Now understood.
Yeah. Any other question?
Sir.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, whenever we start the application, first it will search for the configuration class, right? At annotation with the configuration.
By default, it won't search. We need to refer them here.
Is there any?
It is not a Spring Boot application where it can automatically search for that configuration class.
Okay.
If you don't provide that Java configuration class here, it will not get recognized.
Okay, then will the Spring Store definition error will got, right? Last class we seen one exception, right?
Correct, correct. That configuration class is missing is what is the error that you will get. Correct.
Yeah. Okay. Then whenever we provide that configuration class, then once the class with annotated with at configuration, then it next annotation the container search for admin, right? For creating the object.
Correct, correct, correct. So once this is forwarded, now this is your container, right?
Yeah.
Now this container reads that configuration from that file.
Okay.
And in that file, what we have given admin. So this admin will be marked as a flag intimating the container to read out the configuration, and according to the configuration settings, it will create an object and keep it ready.
Okay, then object pool.
In the object pool, yes, of course, the object will be layered in the object pool. Yes, correct.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So, and there was one more question. I guess Sheetal have asked that question. So let me try to respond. So it says, why we need to have the default as singleton? Why they have made singleton as a default? That's a good question. The reason that they have made the singleton as a default is because by default there is no need of overloading the object. Correct? We don't need to overload the object. If you think about prototype, okay, there might be a scenario where you don't want to create too many objects for this use case. So you might be getting some 2000 requests. For 2000 requests, you don't need to create 2000 object. It could be a shareable object. Why we need to overload the system? So that's why the least usage of objects is coming as a default up. So the singleton, okay, the singleton is always referring, the term called singleton referring to that single object will always be helpful in creating a healthy application. It depends on the use case. We turn that particular object to a prototype. So by default, the IOC is not going to overload itself by creating n number of objects. Unless and until you wanted the IOC container to create n number of objects, then you go for prototype. Otherwise, if I give prototype as a default, then if singleton is not a default, by default, many number of objects will be created, but that's not the way of how application performance would be mattered, right? So we talk about the application performance. When the application performance comes into the picture, we literally go for the least usage of the object, least usage of the object. And the least usage of the object can be achieved only by the pattern called singleton pattern. And that is the reason, or that could be the reason for keeping the singleton as a default. Hope that statement is clear. Any other question? Do anyone have any other question? Sheetal, I guess you got disconnected. I've responded to your question saying that singleton is default because it helps us in creating a least object. The IOC will not overload itself by creating unwantedly many number of objects. So least object creation will always be the default. Okay. So yeah, now let's jump straight into the code. So here we have the messaging system config, right? So I don't want to provide this. The instance is already going to be cooked up by the container. So we'll remove this code. And what we have to place here? Application context dot get bean method. In the last class, I was briefing about it, right? So you can just recall. You have to give it the name. What is the name of the bean? Can anyone guess what is going to be the name of the bean in order to invoke that bean?
Client messaging system.
Yeah. So it's nothing but the name of this method name. Okay. The bean name is client messaging system. So you have to provide that. Can we shorten this name? It seems to be too lengthy. Can we shorten? Yes, of course we can do that. I'll show you shortly. Okay, so now let's see what's going to happen. Now this time I'm going to say Sean Vijay for just our understanding. So let's run this. Perfect. Now we are going through the channel of Spring Ioc Container, correct? I haven't given the instance manually. But now going forward, this client messaging system have to depend on SMS service. And there we need to eliminate the dependency. The tightly coupled environment have to be avoided, correct? Here still we are manually injecting this. Now I'll not inject this. I'm not going to inject this. If I'm not going to inject this, what will be the problem is you'll be getting a null pointer exception. Okay, whether you give null here or not, it's going to be default null. So if I run the application, now you can notice that it's going to throw up a null pointer exception. And this is what we have seen in the last week as well. Correct. So what is missing out? The instance is missing. Why the instance is missing? Because IOC container was not instructed to create an instance for SMS service and inject it over here. Did we give any instructions in such a fashion? No. So how do we do that is in the last week we did, right? So one is via the constructor based injection. Another one is via the setter based injection. We will try to enforce both and then we'll try to go via the auto wiring as well. So the first thing is I'm going to create a constructor. And the constructor, you just try to have this iMessage service as a local variable. And you can just say this dot iMessage service equals iMessage service. This is one approach. This is called as constructor based injection. But still we do a little bit of work around here, right? The next one is setter based injection. So I have setter based injection coming into the picture, correct? So this is a setter method, and we are calling we are going to call it as setter based injection. Setter based injection. So two approaches are there. So let's go for constructor and say it is, for our reference, it's going to be constructor based injection, and the same we can try to apply it in setter and call them as setter based injection. Will this be sufficient? Let's wait and watch. But this is a parameterized constructor. Okay, please make a note of it. So now the problem that we will be facing here is going to the messaging system configuration. Okay, so here the creation of this client messaging system is a problem because the client messaging system is looking out for an argument. So to be on safer side in the client messaging system, it's good to have even a no argumented constructor. So which constructor is going to be invoked right now? If I just run this program, as per the configuration that we have done in the configuration class, it's going to invoke the no argumented constructor, correct? Look at the configuration class. What this configuration class says, creating a new client message system, correct? But this is without an argument. So if I run this, still you will get a null pointer exception. Still we are getting a null pointer exception. Please make a note of it. No argumented constructor is what is invoked, correct? The client messaging system is depending on the iMessage service, but still no argumented constructor is invoked. So we need to do a constructor based injection or we need to do a setter based injection, that we have to decide. So going down, first of all, we need to create an instance for SMS service, correct? We need to create an instance for SMS service. So how do we create? Admin, correct? And public. The return type is SMS service and call it as SMS service. SMS service equals new SMS service. Okay, and this need to be returned. Now we have created SMS service and we are ready. Now what we can do is straight away, as I already explained in the last class, we need to go and do a wiring. Okay, manual wiring. This is called as manual wiring.
That
We are going to
reference
wire
we have
this
to give
instance.
here, sir.
Yes, please.
That reference we have to give here in this class.
Correct, correct. Yes. So we need to call the method so that that reference will be passed to this object. Wiring is happening. One object is wired to another object. So that's why we call technically as wiring. But what wiring are we doing? Manual wiring. Manually we are setting that. That's why it is called as manual wiring. By doing so, the injection is done, is going to be done. The SMS service injection. What type of injection is this? It's a constructor based injection, right? In the constructor itself, we are injecting it. Please make a note of it. In the constructor itself, we are injecting, correct? This is a constructor call. This is a constructor call. I'm sorry. This is a constructor call. And in the constructor call, the reference is given so that the IOC container will read this instruction. When the IOC container is going to create an object of this client messaging system, before creating this object, it will go and create the SMS service object. And this SMS service object is going to be injected into this client messaging system so that the client messaging system can internally use this object. But how this injection happens, how the container is doing the injection? Through the constructor. If you want to do it as a setter, then you need to avoid this line of code. This one you need to avoid. Okay, and pass it on, pass this reference in setter client messaging system dot set message service, and here you need to call that method again. So here again, manual wiring is happening, but it is a setter based wiring or injection, we can call it as. But if you look at this line is going to be a constructor based wiring or constructor based injection. Is that clear? So I'm not going to use this. First, let's see the constructor and then we'll go for the setter. Now, if I go and run, now you will not face any null pointer exception. Perfect. The message is sent to my friend. but it's a constructor based injection. Constructor call is happening. To make it as a setter, okay, let's say what will happen if I do both constructor and setter. Okay, I'm trying to approach with both the ways. You can see it's constructor based is also happening, setter based also happening. But ideally that's not required. You need to follow either one. So which one is advisable? As I told you last week, setter based injection is always advisable. The reason is using a constructor based is like overloading at the time of instantiating itself. Okay, so you can avoid that. But yes, of course you can use constructor based injection when there is a need of that object in the constructor manipulation. Inside a constructor itself, you need that object to be workaround. In that case, then you go for a constructor based injection. Hope you are getting what I mean. What I mean here is, okay, at the time of constructor itself, you need to use this object in order to do some manipulation. So I want this object in the constructor to do a security check, for example. At the time of instantiation itself, I want to do some security logic. For an example, I'm saying. So in that case, you need to go for constructor based. But such kind of a use case will be pretty rare. So it's better you go for setter based injection rather than constructor based injection is what is my advice or my suggestion is. Typically it is based on the use case. Okay, you can go for the choice. So right now I'm going for the setter based injection. Let's see what's going to happen. Now what call is happening? Setter based injection and no argumented constructor. Why no argumented constructor? Because there is no argument being passed. Correct. So it will call the no argumented constructor and there is no constructor based injection is happening. Only setter based injection is happening. Either you can follow constructor based injection or you can follow the setter based injection. This is the conclusion. Is that clear? So like which you can create Twitter servers, you can create mail servers or whatever you want. You can just go ahead and create. So I'll just quickly create those classes and so that we will see more of demos relevant to that. So I'll just go and create a Twitter service. And one more service that we need is mail service. In order to understand this demo, mail service. Going to the Twitter service, implements what to be implemented? iMessage service, correct? And you got to override the send method. And here you can just copy the line and drop it in the Twitter service. Call this as tweet message. And then going to the mail service, implements iMessage service. See, you can do without iMessage service also. There is no need that you need to go through the channel of interface, but always it's advisable to have an interface based approach. Okay, so that you can restrict what a client can see and what client cannot see. Because whatever method that is listed out in the message service interface alone, the client will be accessible through the classes. The class might have some additional methods also. The class might have, let's say, for example, security check. That method will not be accessible for the client because the client will go through via the interface reference. Then it will restrict the user from accessing only that particular method. Okay, so you're revealing only what is essential. So that's something very much needed in terms of bigger application development. So override, and now you say it's email message. Email message. Okay, so we have created all the service types. SMS service is there, Twitter service is there, and mail service is there. But right now we are working around only with the SMS service. Right, we have configured only for the SMS service here. So we can configure for Twitter service and we can configure for mail service. So call it as Twitter service and then call it as Twitter service. Mail service. Mail service. Now, if in case the client says that, hey, I don't want the SMS service, so please upgrade to mail service. What do you have to do? You come here, call that reference. That's all. Just call the reference. Wiring is done. You just run it. Now you will see email message is sent to my friend instead of SMS message. If in case I want the Twitter service, I just want to tweet, a real-time tweeting have to happen, then you better go for Twitter service. Now, if you run it, you'll get the Twitter service. A message is sent via the Twitter service, tweet message. So it's more flexible to just switch around the type of instance that you want to inject to that particular system. It's more comfortable, and you don't need to do a lot of workaround by creating n number of factory classes and so on. It's just a matter of creating the configuration, marking that bean. But ideally, we can get rid of all these configurations. We can get rid of all these configurations, and you can make it an automated fashion of configuration. And that's which we are going to see in the next demo. But before that, I just wanted to end up, before we go for a short break, what I wanted to show you is, what if in case I don't want to use this bigger length of method, is just go for the adbean. Okay. And in the adbean annotation, you have an attribute called name. Okay, and there you can offer a name for it. So let's say CMS shortly. So what is the object reference name? Henceforth, it's going to be called by the container also CMS. Okay, this is how we did in the bean. Okay, compare it. It's going to be CMS. You should recall that XML configuration that we did in the last week. ID is CMS, the same way I'm referring here. Now you can go back to the. Okay, let me just run this. So it says no being named client messaging system. Now this client messaging system name is not going to be taken by the IOC because the configuration says that you please take CMS. Don't take client messaging system. So what we have to do now? Go to the APP application and just change the name to CMS. By doing so, what's going to happen is it's going to inject the instance and get the instance for you. Are you getting it? So this is how you literally make a shortened name. Or else you can also do the other way around. I guess the last week itself I taught you about that, right? We do have one more approach. Rather than doing an explicit typecasting, it's better you can directly, instead of having a workaround with the naming standards, you can just go for saying client, call the class reference, that's all. But when you have a different multiple instance for the same class is where the problem comes. Client messaging system dot class. In that case, there is no need of typecasting. Okay. So still it will work. Now the naming problem will not occur because how many object is there? Totally how many objects that we have in the client messaging system type is only one. So automatically it will pick and give it. But when you have multiple types of that object in the object pool, then where the problem is. Now, one last thing that I would like to explain here is now the same method is going to be called twice. Call 1, call 2. Client system 1, client system 2. Okay. This is just to understand the difference between a singleton and a prototype. Is that really working in a singleton fashion? That we have to test out, right? So what we have in the configuration, is that a singleton? Yes, default is singleton. Default is singleton. How do we test that it is working the singleton way of instantiation? You have given a couple of calls to the container to get the bean instance. Now, if it is not a singleton, you will get two different references. So client messaging system 1 equals client messaging system 2. By this way, you can confirm whether it is a singleton bean or prototype bean. What would be the response now? If it is a singleton, what is the output of this sysout? Any idea?
True, I think.
It has to be true, yes, because we are checking whether these two objects are same, reference are same. Okay, are they referring the same reference, the heap reference? Okay,
Go
so
with
that's what
value means it will differ, sir.
come again.
It now go with reference. Okay. Value means
No, there is no point of a value here, right? We are only talking about references here.
yes,
IOC
yes,
container deals only with reference,
reference.
not with primitive types of values. It is only for object type.
Okay.
Here we are dealing only on objects, not on primitives. So now you can see true because it's singleton. Overall, how many objects is there in the object pool? Only one. But if you go back and just change this scope to prototype, okay, now if you see, it's going to be false because you have how many objects in place? Two objects. How many calls you have made? Two calls you have made. Two calls you have made, and that's why it is. You can also make this bean as a lazy bean or eager bean. Okay, lazy indicates whether a bean is to be lazily initialized. Lazily means only when there is a requirement occurs. Okay, or you want to make it as eager. Okay. Okay. Yeah. So if you see here, the bean will be instantiated on startup by bean factories that perform eager initialization of singletons. Okay. There's not typically an at eager here. If you look at this statement, it's very clearly mentioned. Default to the singleton type, it's all an eager only. Okay. Explicitly, we have to make it as lazy. And that's the reason that we have this annotation called at lazy references. Okay. But being a singleton, there's no point in having a lazy. Being a singleton, there's no point in having a lazy at now. So the default reference is eager because overall, how many objects are there? Only one object. It's not going to make any difference, right? But when you move to the prototype, since we are working around with multiple objects on the calls, there is a chance that you need to activate them explicitly to lazy. So these are defaulted to eager beans and lazy beans. Eager beans and lazy beans. So just make a note of it. Probably you might be having some interview questions on this. If you just look at this at lazy, okay, you have a Boolean. So this is what matters. The default value is referred at lazy to be true. So you can mark them as explicitly to false. Okay, if in case explicitly you want to denote them, you do have the Boolean value representations, whether to not use this lazy or to use this lazy mode. So it depends on the scope level that you're going to use. Based on the scope, if it is going to be a prototype or if it is going to be a singleton, you can go for the choice of using this lazy and deactivating this lazy by using the Boolean. Is that clear? So if you have any questions, please let me know. This is again a communication to the container. Okay, this is again a communication to the container on how this object to be instantiated. Is that a lazy mode of instantiation, or is that going to be a eager mode of instantiation? That decision will be taken by the IOC container by looking at this annotation. So if you see, there are n number of annotations that we will be listing around. So right now only 3 that you're seeing right now, including the add configuration, which is of counting to 4. So there are many number of annotations. So you need to recall all the annotations perfectly when you're sitting in front of the interview. You need to remember those annotations. Not at least with all the attributes of the annotations, but at least with the annotation names, you need to be very clear on. Okay. Okay. I guess we have done with the scope. We have one more thing which we have to see, and that's called as profiling. Okay, we have one more annotation called add profile. Profiling is very much important. We will have more detailed discussions on this profiling concept, because this is one of the interview questions that I usually ask to the candidates while I'm interviewing for my projects. We'll discuss this. So I guess the time is 6:59 at 7. So we'll take 10 minutes of break from today onwards, because 5 minutes is not sufficient. Even I'm getting a little exhausted as I keep continuously talking. So probably we'll take 10 minutes time, 10 minutes of break. So it's 6:59. We'll be back at 7:10. Hello. Am I audible? Please confirm.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Audible.
Sure. Thanks. So I guess we can move forward. We'll get to know this lazy shortly. Okay, so we'll be having some life cycle methods to be implemented. You can either give it on the, on the configuration level, the method level at lazy, or even for all the beans that is going to be created will be a lazy bean. Okay, so you can give it on the class level also. Class level, annotating it at lazy, what it means is, if you see here, we have created 4 beans, right? All the 4 beans will be lazily loaded. Creation means it's not just about the creation, it's the loading into the memory. So basically what happens is all the 4 beans will be lazily initialized. So anyways, the value is false, but if you just make it as true, okay, lazily loaded, default is true anyways. But you don't want all the beans to be lazily loaded. You want a specific bean for specific use case. You want to lazily load it. Then you need to explicitly annotate them, that particular configuration of bean to be at lazy rather than making the whole bean to be a lazy loaded bean. Okay, so just have this information for a while. Probably we'll try to catch up this information more in detail shortly. Now, the main understanding here is so far we were doing a lot of configuration codes. We'll try to reduce that configuration codes as much as possible. That's something very, very important. And that's the way that we have to go for utilizing the Spring newer versions. Newer versions are helping us to reduce the lines of codes on the configuration part. So how do we do that? How are we going to achieve that? That we will see. If you go back to the client messaging system, if you notice that there is a constructor based injection and a setter based injection, correct? I don't want to rely on this constructor based injections and setter based injection. What am I supposed to do? You have to think of the wiring part. Okay, you just go back to the configuration of messaging system config. If you see the wiring is done, manual wiring is done, correct? Which I'm not going to do this time. No manual wiring. If no manual wiring is done, if you just run this, obviously you will end up with an null pointer exception. Correct? Because the reference wiring is not done. Setter based wiring is neither setter based wiring nor the constructor based wiring is done. So Ioc container cannot have the intelligence to understand that it has to wire automatically unless and until the respective annotations are used for auto wiring. Now automatically this wiring have to happen. Now I'm not doing any other change. If you run it, it's a null pointer exception. But if you go back, okay, you can see there are 2 no argumented constructors are coming into the picture because the scope is prototype. We don't want that prototype. Instead, let it be a singleton. If it's a singleton, only one instance is going to be called. One instance is going to be created and one constructor call happens. Okay, so even though we call it twice in the application code, even though we call it twice, it's all the same code, right? So that's why objects are same, true. Okay, now how do we make it as an auto wiring? How do we avoid this null pointer exception? You go back to the client messaging system and you can just think of using this what to say, let's say I have a constructor, argumented constructor, okay, and this argumented constructor is going to be marked as at auto wired. There is an annotation called at auto wired. Now this is on the constructor level auto wiring. Okay, if I just execute this, you still see that the null pointer exceptions are in place. Okay, we are performing an auto wiring. Okay, but even though that auto wiring is in place, okay, still we are engaging with a null pointer exception. So let's try to think of having it in the set iMessage service. Okay, at auto wired. And let's save this. Let's run this. Now you can see there is going to be a different exception by just using that at auto wired annotation. So unsatisfied dependency. Error creating the bean name CMS unsatisfied dependency expressed through the method set iMessage service parameter 0. Okay, it says the parameter is 0. So it means still it is not able to achieve what the IOC container has to do with the auto wiring mechanisms. You're getting it? So even though with the set iMessage service is carrying an iMessage service object, but it is unable to do the auto wiring because the iMessage service literally has multiple types. Okay, so if you see here, expected a single matching bean, but found three instances there. How many instances we have configured in the configuration class? If you notice, there are 3 instances there. Which instance will it auto wire? By calling the setter method automatically. Which instance are you instructing it to bind it? There are 3 types of message services there. 3 types, all these are message service, correct? All these are message service. So which service will it bind it? That's where we are ending up with this problem called multiple beans are matched to the same injection service. So if you go back to this, instead of iMessage service, if you try to use SMS service, or if you use directly Twitter service, then it's ideally perfect. Okay, it can perform its auto wiring perfectly. But if you're not having the option to do that, then you will end up with an exception. So what I can do is I can even use the auto wired here. Okay, at auto wired. At auto wired and giving a name called SMS service. Okay, so I'm sorry, I'm using an SMS service here. Let me replace this to SMS service. I'll come back to the usage of that at auto wired on the variable level. Oh, this is on the constructor, right? Sorry. So now you can see setter based injection is what is happening, and it is invoking the no argumented constructor initially, and this SMS service is injected because the type of service that we have is SMS service. Here explicitly we have marked as SMS service. If it's a Twitter service, you have to provide it as Twitter service here. But what exactly happens here is automatically the wiring happens. Automatically the wiring happens. That's what is important. But what type of wiring is happening here is setter based wiring again. Okay, using a setter we are doing a wiring here. So let's run this. Still it's a setter based injection, but right now it's a tweet message, meaning is what it's confirmed that we are wiring the Twitter service. But go back to the configuration class. We haven't done the wiring here. Manual wiring is not done. I've commented. Only the object of the client messaging system is there. Automatically the injection setter is called because of the annotation called at auto wired in the class level. That is in the client messaging system. We have preferred this at auto wired. Now looking at the constructor. So let's say, for example, I'm not going to have this constructor in place, the no argumented constructor. Okay, then it's a different story because we explicitly call the argumented constructor to inject it. So the understanding here is at auto wired makes our life pretty easier by automatically wiring the instance to the respective place. But this might seems to be a little bit of complex again, because again we are going for writing the setter method and the constructor methods. Will that lead to some problem of again overloading the code? Yes, of course. So we can still comment out this. We don't need a setter. Okay. We don't need a setter. Neither the setter nor the constructor is required. I'm not using setter, I'm not using constructor, but still the injection will happen. Now, if you run this, it will throw a null pointer exception because none of the injection service is working fine. You haven't done a manual wiring, you haven't done auto wiring of setter or constructor, nothing is done, but still it is not injected with any instance, so that we end up with a null pointer exception. But to avoid this, just a matter of at auto wired is more sufficient here. This is called as field level auto wiring. This is pretty much simplified. Field level auto wiring. Okay, a direct injection to the field will happen. If I run this, okay, the problem is again, it's because we have multiple SMS servers and so on. So that's the reason that we have this problem of multiple bean is available for the same type. Expected single matching bean, but found 3. So we can go ahead and use SMS service. If I run it, you'll get the SMS service output. Okay. If it is a Twitter service, you will get the Twitter service, but it's a direct injection of the field level. Please be noted, this auto wired is injecting the instance directly into the field level. So rather than going for setter based injection and constructor based injection, it's better to go for a field level wiring. Henceforth, going forward in any of the demos tomorrow or upcoming weeks, I'll be following only the field level auto wiring because that's the more proficient way of injection that we can follow in the Spring Framework technology. But I'm trying to teach you the basics, the fundamentals from where we can start the scratch. But that can be eliminated going forward. If you go for Spring Boot, you will never see these kind of setters or constructor based injections anymore. It's only a field level injections or field level auto wiring that you can perform. Okay, so totally the code is reduced now, and we are just following this pattern of auto wiring mechanisms. Great, but there is one trouble. What is the trouble? The trouble is we have this iMessage service, but when it is an iMessage service, I'm unable to achieve the auto wiring because there are multiple beans are available of the same type. What I mean by the multiple beans, let's understand that. Make a note of it. There is one Twitter service object, and there is one SMS service object, and there is one mail service object, correct? This is what we have right now. Now all three are referring to whom? iMessage service, because they all implement this iMessage service in interface, correct? So when you're asking for iMessage service object, hey, please give me the iMessage service object. Please give me the object is what I'm asking. Please auto wire it. But in the object pool, there are 3 objects of type iMessage service is there. So when you try to auto wire with the iMessage service is where the problem occurs. Okay, is where the problem occurs. So how do we resolve this problem? Either you need to have 3 object reference like SMS service, Twitter service, you create 3 references and you denote it. Okay, or So if you notice here, I'm trying to use SMS service. Now you can see SMS message comes in. The problem is resolved, but still we are using iMessage service. You're getting it? The type is iMessage service, but the reference variable name is SMS service. So what is the difference here is this is a type based wiring. This is your field based wiring. Okay, field means the variable name. This name and your configuration. Okay, in the configuration class, you have the name of the method. This name should be same. So what if in case I give a name called SMS? What will happen? If I run, since the names are not same, because for this instance, the name is kept as what? SMS, it can't find that particular bean, unsatisfied dependency. There is no SMS service object at all. So what you have to do is you have to give the variable name as SMS. So the bean name and the variable name should be same. If the bean name and the variable name is same, then the problem is resolved. Name based wiring. Okay, it is called as name based wiring or type based wiring, data type based wiring. You can also perform a data type. Data type is pretty simple. If it's a SMS service as a type, it will inject SMS service. Okay, it's up to you how you want to configure this. Okay, now you have to use SMS here. Since the name of that bean is kept as SMS. But what happens if it's a Twitter? Suddenly if you're changing it to Twitter, then you have to make a change again in many places. Okay, so here you need to use that Twitter service. So that's the reason that we go for a generic name called iMessage service. But when I have iMessage service, when there are multiple beans are available, then we end up with a problem. Then we are ending up with a major problem of the same type. To resolve this, either you have to go with type based or you have to go with reference based. So what is advisable? What is better approach? The better approach is you can just have the same type. That's not a problem. You can just have 3 different variables always kept in memory. Okay. So that particular type of object will get instantiated in all the places. Yeah, that type of object will get wired. Twitter service and email service. I guess it's mail service, correct? Where is that? Twitter service and mail service. I'm just looking at the method name itself instead of, or let's say, to be more precise, name equals Twitter. Name equals mail. By this way, you can resolve the problems of that multiple objects of the same type existence. So go back, just call this as mail. So the name of the bean and the name of the variable should be same so that it is resolved by name. Okay, the reference injection is resolved by name of the instance instead of the data type. Data type is all same, right? So now you can think of having just switching the variable here. Instead of SMS, you can just have mail. That's all you have to do. That's the only change that you're going to do. So just run the program and you'll get email. But if you want Twitter, you can just change it to Twitter. Just run it. You'll get Twitter. Tweet message. Correct? So which one would you prefer? Will you go for explicit writing of these setter based injections and constructor based injections, or you'll just go for a field level injection? Obviously, we'll be going for a field level wiring, field level auto wiring. Just by using a single annotation, its job is done. At auto wired, the logic is done. But keeping all these all these types to be configured in the configuration class, messaging system configuration class, we are supposed to do the configuration code should be in place. Still, it will be considered as a singleton beans. All these are going to be considered as a singleton beans. But via the usage of at auto wired, we are trying to eliminate the usage of constructor based wiring and setter based wiring. Hope you're getting it. So which is called as an auto wiring here is, what is called as an auto wiring here is, instead of manually we wire them in the configuration file or as in a configuration code, it is going to be automatically wired with the help of this single annotation called @auto wired annotation. That's all. But the instance should be available in the pool. Only then the auto wiring will be done. If the instance doesn't carry that object, then obviously you will get an exception. But as I said already, the object is there in the object pool, correct? All the three objects are there in the object pool. So this is the object pool, IOC's object pool. And here all the three objects are kept. So one by one, it's getting injected. So how the container knows that it has to inject these objects here? It's because it is referring to that annotation called @auto-wired. So when the code is compiled at that time itself, when the code is getting executed at that time, these are the flags which will be recognized by the IOC container. When this will be recognized? When this class instance is created in the configuration, we have a separate configuration code for creating an instance of the client message system. So when the IOC is trying to create an instance for this class, it will look out automatically for the availability of the @auto-wired annotation, and it will take all the objects, it will pick all the objects and assign it on the respective field. And this is called as a field level auto wiring. And how it will be wired? It will look at the name. Okay, it will look out for the name, and in the name, if it is SMS, it will go and search for the object which is kept with the name called SMS and pick that object and assign it here. It will go and look out for another object called Twitter. If that object is available, that object will be assigned here. So you can see the IntelliSense level have been improved for the IOC. It's slowly improvising its IntelliSense level, and that's how it has been the architecture have been designed. You're getting it? So by this way, obviously in every places using of constructor based injections and setter based injections can be thoroughly avoided, and you can replace it with single annotation called @auto-wired. If you have any questions on this, please let me know before we go for the last concept called removing the configuration code from the configuration file. From this configuration, I will remove all these. Everything will be removed. I'll be removing all these, and I'll just place this client messaging system configurations alone in place. Even that can be avoided, but we'll slowly remove even this. I don't want, so too many number of configurations is what is a burden for a developer or a programmer. And that's what we are trying to eliminate as much as possible with the help of annotations. So if you have any questions on this auto wired, please do let me know.
Hello, sir.
Yes, please.
Sir, you left out art profile bean. You said you will.
Yeah. Of course, we have to see that, because that profile comes only when we understand this auto wiring completely.
Fine then. Carry on, sir.
Yeah. Is that clear? Auto wiring is clear, right? Automatically wire the instance. That is the meaning. Automatically inject the instance to the respective fields or to the respective dependencies. Fine. If there are no much of a question, then I guess we can progress well. Now looking at so now the auto wiring is clear. The next logic is we need to remove the references. Okay, we need to remove these configurations and eliminate this. I don't want to do these many number of configurations also. It should be automated. Anyways, before we go to that level, okay, let's also understand this. I'll go back to the client messaging system. Okay, temporarily, let's bring it back to iMessage service. Okay, so I'm going to bring it back to this iMessage service the same way how it happened, but this will end up with a problem right now. Okay, the reason is there are multiple objects of the same type is existing. So what we do right now is I just wanted to teach you about the profiling. So going to the config system, you saw that already we have the option of using profile. So in each thing, I'm going to add something called profile and just going to give a name called this is for production. Okay, prod. During the production time, this particular configuration will be picked up. And this will be during the time of development. Okay, this is only an example for understanding the profiling. These are bean levels in profiling. And this is during the time of QA. Okay, you have a QA environment, you have a dev environment, and you have a production environment. There are 3 different environments of application and environments are there. So I have designed all the 3. But if I run with this code of profiling, which one will be picked up? Obviously, it will end up with a problem. What is a problem? Unsatisfied dependency. So it is unable to pick up that object of the iMessage. Okay, so you can see at least one bean of that iMessage service is required, right? But none of the iMessage service is available. Why? Because none of these beans are created. Right now, there is no beans of iMessage service is created. No SMS service, no Twitter service, no mail service objects are created. The bean, the object pool is right now carrying only one instance. That is client messaging system instance. CMS instance is alone there. No Twitter, no SMS, no mail. Why? Because I've activated the profile. Right now, I'm not activating. I'm sorry. I've enabled the profiling concept. I've enabled the profiling concept. But when you enable the profiling concept, you have multiple profiles being enabled. So which profile do you want to use in the system? So for that, you need to do an activating the profile. Configuration is there, but for this specific configuration, you need to activate that particular profile. So if you are in the development time, you use this configuration. But once your code is pushed to the production, you use the prod. But for that, you need to do the activation, right? So how do you do the activation? If it's a Spring Core application, the activation is done through the code. Going to the app, okay, in the application context, you can use this object dot get environments. There's a method called get environment. And in the get environment method, there is a call to a method called set. I'm sorry. This is what? Okay, this is application context. One thing is, please be noted, if you want some additional methods for further configurations, it's better to use a direct class object. Don't use this way. You go to the class level instantiation rather than interface level instantiation. Okay, the one step is that don't load the configuration class at the beginning itself. Please don't load the configuration class at the beginning. Avoid this. I told you, right? This is one way of loading the configuration class. Now I'm not going to load it through this. Wait and watch when I'm going to load. So get environment dot set active profile. Now you might have a question. Why is that you have changed to this type instead of application context? Annotation config application context is also an application context type, correct? Because this class implements that interface. But why suddenly you changed it to this? Because these type of methods are applicable only for this class, not on the interface level. They have only limited methods. They have only limited access to the methods. Okay, you have some additional methods where these classes might have. If you want to access such option of methods, then obviously you have to go for the annotation config application context. Direct instantiation to the class should happen. Now the next question is, why do you remove the configuration file? You need to pass the configuration file. Then only the context container can read that. Yes, of course, that's correct. But I want to activate the profile first. I need to set what is the profile. Based on the profile only, the container will read that configuration. Because in the configuration, you have 3 profiles. Once you activate the profile to the container will go and search for the profile in the configuration file. Which profile is matchable to that, which you have set, that profile of configuration will be executed. Rest will not be executed. You're getting it? So that's why a bit of change on the code that appears here. Now, what you can do is in the activate profile, you can just go and say what you want to activate here. So what do you want to activate? I want to activate Dave profile. Once after you activated, how do I load the configuration class now? Application context dot register. Okay, you have a register method. That register method will help you to register multiple configuration classes. Right now we have only one, so it's not a problem, but you can load multiple classes out here. This is a dynamic way to load. Another way, second way to load your configuration classes. Second way to load your configuration classes. You're getting it? After loading, this is not default loading, right? Like this in the constructor based loading is not happening explicitly through register. So it's always advisable to do a refresh of your container before using it. So you have refresh. So what this refresh does is load or refresh the persistent representation of the configuration, which might be from Java based configuration. Please make a note of it, which might be from a Java based configuration, an XML file configuration, a property file configuration, either one. You can do a refresh so that dynamically the configuration file will be loaded and it will help the context to understand the configuration clearly. So this is a startup method. Okay, so you can just have this refresh at the end. It's always a good practice when you load it through register. If it is without a register, automatically in the constructor level itself, it's going to happen. So when you load it through a register, the container have to be refreshed. Is one of the healthier practice that we need to follow. So these are the 3 steps that we need to follow. If I execute by activating this profile of Dave, now you should notice the output is for tweet. But if I want to set the profile to prod, then that prod configuration object alone will be loaded in the memory. Now I'll be getting prod. SMS message is the prod. If you want the QA environment, okay, then it's going to be mail message, email message, correct? So you need to set the profiles. Now the question is, can we activate multiple profiles? Prod and 2 configuration? Yes, of course, but there is one problem, right? When both are activated, both are depending on the same configuration, same class type, iMessage service. So there you will have a problem again. If it's a different object, then it's fine. But you have same reference, right? So you will end up with that 2 objects of the same type is found. 2 objects of the same type of iMessage service is found. Okay, so this problem can be resolved by applying the logic of what we discussed before, by just giving the name, Twitter, mail. Okay, by this way, you can resolve the problem. But right now I directly have iMessage service. So it is confused. Which object do you want to inject here? Because I have 2 objects. One is SMS I have, another one is Twitter. Which one you want is what the IOC container is prompting. So it is unable to proceed further and it ends up with an exception. So what we have to do now is think of, according to the use case, profilings can be loaded. Multiple profiles can be loaded. But if it's a different object representation, then it's fine. Okay. Any number of profiles can be loaded. That's not a problem. So in the app class, you just recall that you can set any number of profiles, because the set profiles, the method name is profiles, means multiple profiles can be loaded. It depends on the use case. So let me right now go for the QA, and if I execute this, this will properly get executed. This is what the profiling is all about. Is that clear? So I'll just comment out this. This is profiling codes. I'll bring back this one quickly. If you have any questions on the profiling, please do let me know before I take you to the next demo. That's the last demo. Anyways, I'm planning to complete that because tomorrow we have to catch up with the JDBC part, and that's a little bit of bigger module. We need to go forward in connecting with the database. So kindly try to adjust with one more demo. I know that it might be a little bit of overloaded, but yes, of course, we have to do that in order to catch up for next day's schedule. That's simple. The demo is going to be pretty simple. I'm just going to eliminate all the configurations and use it with fully annotation. So it will further help you to understand that you can avoid all configurations thoroughly. You don't need to meddle with too much or too many number of configurations. Already we have eliminated what? Setter based injection, constructor based injection eliminated, replaced it with just auto wired. That's all. Now the next thinking is to avoid the configuration code itself. These many configurations I want to avoid. Will there be a choice to do it? Yes, of course. But before going to that, if you have, you can also do not the profiling only for the method level. You can also do on the class level. Okay. Here also you can have profile. But these profiles are actually referred on the class level configuration. So what does it mean? In one
class level means it will affect the entire classes, sir.
It will be applied for the entire, yes, entire methods here. The entire class will be of prod level configurations. Okay, so you can create multiple classes here. You can create multiple configurations. Okay, so which configuration do you want to load dynamically? Okay, at the runtime, which configuration part do you want to capture is what the deal is all about. So I will create, for example, for sample, I'm just creating one more class called database configuration. Okay, there's a class called database configuration. So this class can also be marked as at configuration. And this can be marked as at profile. Okay, and you can call this class only during the prod, not during the day. You're getting it? So how many configuration classes are there? There are two configuration classes. Both the configuration classes will be handed over to the IOC, but which one will be loaded at the runtime? You can decide based on the profile name. So in the code, how it looks like is, now you will get to know the multiple loadings of classes. What are the class you need to load now? Database, databases configuration dot class. So both the classes are registered. Okay, both the classes are registered, but which class will be picked up? Only the class which is going to be referred as QA. Okay, which configuration class will be picked up is depending on the activation of the profile. Profile is QA. So the class which is marked as QA profile, that particular configuration class will be created. Actually, it's not about database configuration. Okay, don't think it this way. To be more precise, I can even because this will be helpful if you understand this. When you come to Spring Boot, you can understand these profiling there. Okay, so try to.
We will take this as who can access that class, like that, or
no, it's not who can access.
then
It's about in which environment which class need to be picked up. If you are pushing the code into the production server, okay, at that time you can activate the profile as prod, so that the prod level configurations alone will be picked up. You're getting it? See,
Okay,
in the real-time development, there will be
10
multiple
configuration classes are there. In that production time, only 2 configuration files only needed means it will activate. Like that we will take or?
Correct. Whichever classes that you have marked as prod, those configuration classes will be included. Yes.
Okay.
So the container, IOC container, if 2 classes are marked as prod profile, okay, and 2 classes are marked as QA, 1 class is marked as dev, another configuration class is marked as test. So this is what environment? Test environment. This is development environment. This is QA environment. This is production environment. So we have how many environments totally? 4 environments. In all 4 environments, the configurations will all be there, but slightly there will be a different. For dev, you might have a database configuration as MySQL. That is developer node, right? In developer, it is MySQL, but in production graded application, it will be Oracle. So you'll be having an Oracle there, and here it is a MySQL. For testing, it is just a DB2. For QA, it might be, let's say, for example, MongoDB. You're getting it? So configurations will be accordingly defined. So when I say prod, when the application is connecting, it will connect with Oracle. It will pick those configuration classes in account. So you don't need to rewrite that configuration again and again. You don't need to change the configurations again and again. That is the understanding. You're getting it? You don't need to change the configurations again and again. You can write all the configuration classes listed out here and mark the profiling flag based on the environment of productions or QA or dev you go for. You can literally choose or set the profiles accordingly. You can also go for prod and QA also sometimes, but that doesn't make sense logically, because any one of the environment only you can launch the application as. But there are possibilities where you can have multiple profiles to be chosen also to enable the configuration codes for the IOC container. So now what the IOC container will do? The IOC container will look at the profile. It is prod. So it will go to the prod based classes, which is annotated with @profile of prod. Those classes will get activated. Those classes will be considered for the configuration. There is a meaning. Is that clear? So this is how in real time you will be working around with. The real-time application development will be following the profilings, because when I'm doing it on my laptop, it's a dev environment, development environment. The same application I'll be pushing in a sprint. In every sprint, I'll be pushing it to the QA. When it goes to the QA, I cannot sit and write a QA configuration and copy paste, or you cannot do that, right? You have all the configurations in your application in your project. Just switch. It's just a switch between the configurations. Okay, you switch with it's a prod switch. If you switch it on, it will consider it to be the prod configurations. If you switch to the QA, if you switch on the QA, it will consider the QA configurations. Only the difference is everything will be the same, but here the DB that is going to be used is Oracle. For example, I'm saying here it might be used with MySQL, but there might be multiple other configuration difference might be seen. But I'm just saying this could be the understanding for using a profiling. Is that clear? If you still have any questions, please let me know. Anyways, I don't want to rush it to the next concept. We'll see the elimination of the configurations tomorrow. We'll continue with that. I don't want to push it further. So let me stop here. But if you have any questions, please do let me know. I'll take more questions. Your questions are always welcome.
Sir, can you open up config file?
Yeah.
Here you are mentioning line number 14 and 16. You are mentioning configuration profile, right? 14 and 16.
Correct. Correct.
Is there any hierarchy? Which one should be on the?
Nothing like that. Nothing like that. You
Nothing
can put
like that,
anything
right?
anywhere. Yeah.
Okay. Similarly, on line 20 and 21, right? Line number 20 and 21.
Yes.
Can be swapped, right?
This
It
doesn't
doesn't
matter.
take any hierarchy.
Hierarchies will never be a matter for configuration, because it only reads. It only reads whether those things are there automatically. If you put the profile first, okay, Or if you actually this itself, it seems to be different because first we need to put the profile.
Okay.
It will check for the profile. Prod means then it will go for the next bean of instantiating it.
Fine.
But now it is reversed, but still it is working correctly. Correct. So this order doesn't make any big difference.
Fine. Thanks.
Yeah. So any other question? So please do remember auto wiring is the magical annotation here. At auto wired is the magical annotation. Why it is called as a magical annotation? Because automatically it is performing the job of injection. That is wiring. Wiring the instance based on the instance that is available. Automatically it picks the instance and then wire it. It could be a name based wiring or it could be a type based wiring. Type means data type based. Name means it is the name of the bean, and the name of the variable should be same. If it is same, automatically the auto wiring will pick that object and bind it. If you don't want that, then you have to go for data type based wiring. Data type based wiring will lead to a problem when you have the same, when you have multiple objects for the same type. To resolve that, it's better to go for name based wiring.
So now auto wiring job is done by profile, right? Or admin?
Come again?
Auto wire job is done by profile bean or sorry, profile annotation or bean?
No. See, auto wiring is nothing to do with profile, right? Auto wiring, yeah. See, without profile also auto wired will work. Auto wired work is what just to see which instance is there in the
correct. It's different
thing and bind it. Profile, what it says is profile is for the Ioc container to create an instance.
Right. Okay.
So if you say prod activation, it will only create prod level configuration instance and keep it ready.
Just to keep as an index, right? Bean denote an index.
Exactly. It is similar to that. So auto wire logic is just to wire them. Whatever instance is there, that instance is, if it is matchable, it will automatically take the instance and bind it. That's all.
Fine. So it's coming under profile. Auto wire.
No. See, that's what I'm saying. We don't need to talk about the profile at all here. See, profile is okay. See, I don't want profile. Profile is the next concept that I introduced, right? You forget about this. No profile. It doesn't depend on profile. Okay. Fine. I don't have profile at all. Now what happens is you have just defined some multiple beans here. There are many configurations we have done. Okay. Usually if you see that whichever bean that we have configured, that bean is what we are manually wiring here. Correct. Here we have done a manual wiring.
Yes.
I'm eliminating this line. The whole line I'm eliminating. Setter based. Correct.
Yes.
I'm eliminating. Constructor based manual wiring, I'm eliminating. How I'm eliminating? Eliminating with the help of auto wired. What this auto wired will do is, looking at the variable type or the name, it will come and look out for the availability of the object out and automatically it will bind it. We need not do this.
Fine.
At profile is a different story. At profile is profiling the configuration category based on the prod, Dave,
environment, based on environment.
Yes.
Understood.
This is common even in Angular application. If you are working on Angular, there also you have profilings. Environment files configuration files will be there. Prod, test, and so on. Environment-prod, environment-dev, environment-test. Environment is default profile. Okay. That level of configurations will be picked up. So that's
we can take like this. Ioc container having lot of annotations. In that auto wire also one of annotations to injecting the dependency. Correct.
Exactly. You're correct. So IO's auto wiring is one of the annotation in the Spring and in Spring annotation category. Okay. This auto wiring is helping us in injecting the instance automatically. But what UtProfile does is UtProfile will only activate the configuration based on the profile settings. That's all. So let's say, for example, if it is a SMS is what is given in the prod, and if you have set the prod, only SMS object will be available in the pool, object pool, because the profile is prod and the activation is also prod. Prod is mapped to the SMS service. Which object will be available here? SMS object will be available in the pool. What AutoWire will do? AutoWire will only look at this object pool. This AutoWire will never look at the profile. Okay, there is no link between the AutoWired and profile. Please make a note of it. Ioc container is what is going to understand what profile is, and accordingly it is going to do the configuration. So let's take an example. You go to a hotel, okay, there is a veg menu, okay, and there is a non-veg menu, correct? If you are a veg person, you will go for the veg menu. If you are a non-veg person, you will go for the non-veg menu. What is that menu is all about? Let's consider that to be equivalent to configuration. Okay. These are configuration codes, veg and non-veg. Now you want to enable this. This is enabled with profiling. This is a profiling. Okay. So if it is a profile activation is for veg, okay, the Ioc container will read all the configurations only relevant to the veg and keep all the objects ready based on the vegetarian menu. All the objects will be kept ready. AutoWired, what it will do is, looking at the type or the variable, it will go to the pool and then pick that object and inject it automatically. That's all. So this is nowhere related to profile. You cannot relate them. They are separate. But these are all the different annotations that we will be using. So if you see here, so far we have studied many annotations, right? So at configuration, at lazy, at profile, at bean, at scope, right? At profile, at AutoWired. So the main logic for us is to keep learning all these annotations very clearly. When to use what annotations and how it is used, and so on. So you can also consider this way. Your application might connect with 3 different databases. That's what as I said, right? So you will have DB configuration, DB config 1, DB config 2, DB config 3. One is for Oracle, another one is for MySQL, another one is for DB2. Now what happens, all these 3 classes, configuration classes will be available, but everything is marked as profile, at profile, at profile, at profile. IOC, when runtime, when it is activated to prod, it will go here. If it is Dave, it will go here, it will go here. That object will be kept in the object pool based on the profiling. That particular configuration and that particular object will be kept in the pool. Now at AutoWire will ask for the DB connection object. When DB connection object is asked by that AutoWired, that AutoWired meaning is it will go to the object pool and pick that particular DB connection object and use it here. But which DB connection object will be available there? That is based on the profiling which is done by the Ioc container. Whether it's an Oracle DB connection or is the DB2 DB connection or is that a MySQL DB connection, that is already predefined. I mean already understood and created by the Ioc container. Before even at AutoWired comes into the picture, profiling will happen. Profiling is happening at the very initial time. AutoWired happens after that. Okay, so don't compare AutoWired with at profile. Still, if you have any questions, please do let me know. I guess I'm trying to make at my best to give you a clarity. Do anyone have any other question? I guess we are running out of time. It took more time, but anyways, I'm okay. If you people want to stay for a couple of more minutes and you want to ask questions, you can stay. Otherwise, people who are okay also can leave. If you still have any questions, please do let me know.
Sir,
Yes. Please.
Can you explain the lazy annotation? Will you be able to explain that lazy annotation? What's the purpose
Yes,
of
yes,
that?
of course I have to do that. That's why we have to go for the next level configuration,
Okay.
next level demo, which I'm unable to do it because we need to understand the lifecycle methods,
Okay.
constructing and destructing, at post construct and at pre destroy. We have annotations, and when we use that, we will get to know the usage of how this lazy is working. I want to
Okay,
simplify,
sir.
so I guess I will not have time to demonstrate that now. Tomorrow we'll
Then
catch.
that's okay, sir. Yeah, thank you.
Any other question? So let me do one thing. I'll just jot down. So tomorrow we'll see at post construct lifecycle method and at pre destroy lifecycle methods and removing all manual configurations and replace them with annotations. Okay, and we have to see property file handling. It is called as property sources. That is something very important which we will be seeing. So these are the topics that's still pending in the core, Spring core. We'll see this in detail, and after completing this we will jump into Spring JDBC. I'll be showing the demo with connecting to MySQL. The reason is I cannot directly install Oracle into my Mac machine. Okay, I have to go for a virtual machine, and in that virtual machine I have to capture the Oracle instance to be installed. It will take some time. Probably next week I'll be up and running. So anyways, JDBC will be continued on next week also. So at the time I'll be showing even the demo on Oracle as well. So time being, tomorrow we'll be connecting with MySQL database. So if you want to have MySQL DB also to be installed, please make it up and running in your system. Any other question? So Spring Core itself is more important. We have many things in Spring Core. Okay, when you are very much strong in Spring Core, then obviously you can catch it up other libraries in the Spring framework. Okay, if there is no questions, I guess we can wind up. If you have, please do let me know. So please do practice.
So further, can we implement this in a server and check, sir? Going further in the JBoss server or?
This we cannot do, right? Because this is a standalone application.
No, I'm talking about some real-time web application. I'm saying.
Of course, yes. So next week we are going to start with Spring MVC. Spring Web MVC, correct?
Okay.
So at that time, that application will go into the JBoss server.
Fine. Okay then. Okay.
So right now, what we are working around is only on jar. But when we go to the Spring Web MVC, we'll be dealing with WAR.
Okay.
Web Archive.
Fine.
Yes. But traditionally, I will not be spending much of a time on the front end, okay, like JSPs or something, because the main focus on the Spring Web MVC will be implemented through REST.
Correct.
Okay, because the front end nowadays it's completely replaced with Angular, or you have to go for React.js. So these are your front end layers, correct? So Spring Web MVC will be seeing the complete concepts with REST, and also a small demonstrations with JSPs, which we'll be doing it. So please do understand that Spring Framework technologies are going to be highly focused on developing nowadays on microservices. Okay. So that's how it has been focused on, and that's why we go for Spring Boot. Correct. So it's all a REST-based services. Yeah. Any other question? So please do recall this learning. Please do practice it. Anyways, tomorrow evening is what we have. So go back and then try to practice. I guess someone have thrown any question. Okay. So please do practice. That's something very important. Practice makes the man perfect. I'm very much close to that sayings. Please do practice. Otherwise, it's not, you can't just like that catch it up. Okay. How many ever sessions you attend, it's going to be my session or somewhere MOOC sessions. You have to practice a lot. So try to do a multiple practices. Anyways, I'll try to get you more demonstrations. So if you see, last time we used a different use case, today we are using a different use case. Whatever possible use cases, I'll try to bring it up as much as possible. Okay, I'm done with it. So we can wind up. Have a great evening and stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. You're welcome. Thanks.